Well, it's, I don't think it's a bad thing to have,
No.
you know, more advanced, more security or something. You know, it all you do. Well, it's my opinion, to get to know all the people and ask them, hey, want to try to play some water?
No, we had a couple of break-ins. Those are big.
Yeah, right, when there wasn't as many.
Yeah, I got broken into.
I think Sue was working.
Yeah, that's. Well, there's been, you know, a couple. Other incidents throughout the last, 10 years that I've heard of,
Mhm.
but it's hard to keep between.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone is kind of one. You like those new little signs that said we're watching you. I like it. It's the neighborhood blocks.
She's on auction.
Oh, is that right?
But,
She able to walk around?
yeah, well, at the house.
Got it all?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's down there across.
Yeah,
There you go.
but at the house. Of course. But, she's okay, so that's fine. Right now, our community is, our sister. It was like. She doesn't drive.
More information.
Yeah. You flying?
My dad worked for Duke.
So are you, just trying to get all in? I think we have, what's that?
I still know.
We have one more addition.
Well, and more in the summertime.
Yeah.
We thought one there with the fire.
Yeah.
Okay, we have all committee members that are virtually.
Okay, is Paul able to come in or are you waiting for him to respond? Sue, are you able to get Paul in?
I've sent a request. It's just waiting for him to respond.
Oh, okay. Well, we have quorum. I'll get the meeting started. So welcome all. Thank you for coming to our, I don't know how many meetings. Many meetings, but this is the first one, first solid waste advisory committee meeting in at least probably 8 months, I believe, six or 8 months. During that time, Parametrics, our consulting group, and a slew of sub-consultants have been doing a lot of technical work and technical review on a myriad of issues that we're going to bring forward today in summary and over the next couple meetings in a lot of detail. So I want to welcome you all here today. Before we start, I'm going to do a quick roll call of committee members. Sorry. Screening in place. Paul Battaglia. Looks like you're here. You want to say hello?
Good morning.
Good morning. Ed Finch in Redmond or John Roberts. Not here. Erica Lindberg from Republic Services. Is here. Erwin Sweatnam, of Cascade Disposal,
Present.
present. Jared Black, citizen at large.
I'm here. Am I there?
Yep, good morning, Jared.
Here.
Keith Cazares, citizen at large. Here. Chris Ogren, citizen at large. Not here. Robin Bora. Here. Robin's here. Luke Dines, citizen at large. Cassie Lacy from
Here.
City of Bend, she's here. Mike Riley, Environmental Center. Not present, but we do have quorum. So that, let's move into the meeting itself. So first order of business is, well, we should review the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as offered?
I move to approve the meeting agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Cassie moved, Robin seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. All right, second thing, review and approval of October meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
Moved by Keith, seconded by Erwin. Any discussion, comments, edits? You're in nothing? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So meeting members are approved, meeting minutes are approved. So next up is public comment. So if there's anybody who wants to make a public comment before we move into the meeting, please stand up or come forward and state your name and go ahead.
My name is Steve Payer, and I live on the northeast side out of Pine Mountain. And there's been some concern about the safety of the highway between Bend and Milliken and back. I pretty much come into town every day, and so I travel Highway 20. And I would offer that through this crazy weather we've had, I mean, this is insane. I've been in Central Oregon since '81, and to me, this is kind of unusual. One day you've got black ice, one day you've got snow, one day you have nothing. And you go through several odd little microclimates, and ODOT has done an exemplary job all winter long of keeping the road plowed and sanded. Never have I once, and I would say I come into town 5 days out of 7, and never have I once seen a big rig, an 18-wheeler in distress. So if somebody's, oh, well, we gotta go over Horse Ridge and down the other side, and there's a couple of low areas that tend to collect cold weather there between the big aggregate pit and Milliken. Haven't seen any problems. The only problem is during dry weather, there's been 2 different big rigs that have pulled over on the shoulder headed westbound for whatever reason, I don't know. And that shoulder sloughed underneath them, and they had to get a big wrecker to come pull them back onto the highway. That might be something that you would approach ODOT about, but there's the turnout at the top of the hill at the historical site to look down into the canyon, and then there's another turnout, a wide spot as you go down the west side. So to reiterate, I've sometimes I drive slow, I drive 40 miles an hour, but they seem to be maintaining that road at a high level of safety for trucks and traffic.
All right, thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Yes?
I'm Craig Miller, I'm GIS specialist for the Oregon Natural Desert Association. I'm not speaking for the Oregon Natural Desert Association, but my views are probably pretty close. It's gonna be interesting to see what comes out in the technical report. But there are a few things that I'd like to give you a heads up. My view, I'm really opposed to both locations. As far as the Moon Pit, it goes right next to a wildlife corridor and Deer Winter Range. Also, you'll be setting precedent by citing a landfill right on the boundary of the wilderness area if you go that direction. On the other hand, I believe the Rock East is even worse in terms of wildlife. There's a sage grouse corridor that runs right through where the site is. And that allows for genetic diversity between the sage grouse to the east versus 3 sage grouse selects that are on the west. And I think it's such an important corridor that it's very likely that those 3 sage grouse selects will blink out if the site is located at east. In addition, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in December came out with their priority wildlife conservation areas, which includes very important wildlife that need to be protected, and includes areas plus corridors that connect those areas. And the Rock East is right in the center of one of those wildlife corridors. And so I don't see the Fish and Wildlife being likely to approve that site just because where it's located in relation to the wildlife conservation area. So, and there are other wildlife issues out there, pronghorn and elk winter range and deer winter range. So those are my comments. And I'd be glad to entertain any questions if you have any questions.
Thank you, Craig. Any other public comment?
Steve Wright, Milliken, landowner out there. And just kind of echoing on a couple of these things that were mentioned. The highway shoulders are very narrow, I believe, from the Horse Ridge Summit all the way towards, Milliken Brothers, Hampton. And it's a lot wider down on that northwest side of the Horse Ridge Summit, down by the Moon Pit. The other thing is I have seen the birds out there in the Milliken area a few times. I spent a lot of time out there. I've also hiked around the Badlands quite a few times and around the Moon Pit area and the Dry River Canyon. I've never seen the birds in those areas. I've also seen the herds of the antelope out there in Milliken. Really beautiful. As far as the Badlands go, it is right next to where the Moon Pit is going, but it's only a small little area that touches the Badlands. The Badlands is such a big area, and there's multiple other trailheads that access the Badlands, not just that one that's down by the Moon Pit. So people can still enjoy that whole area. Not only that, there's still trucks going in and out of that area right now. It's active operation, which helps, start up that if you were to locate the landfill there, it's kind of I don't wanna say a shotgun start, I don't know the word for it, but. And the Milliken Valley is untouched. You know, there is, community people out there, there's beautiful wildlife, there's a Pine Mountain, which is untouched, there's an observatory up there. Which is just a few miles right above where you want to site that landfill. So anyway, I'm against having a landfill out there in Milliken. I feel the Moon Pit is a better choice of the two. That's about it.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Any other public comment? Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it. So that being done, I'm gonna hand it over to Ryan to start the. Anybody on? Oh, actually, anybody online want to make public? Oh, yeah. Is there any hands up online, Sue, of anybody who wants to make public comment? Thank you.
No,
No, okay. Oh, actually, before I hand it over to you, I just want to go over the steps that we're going to be going through over the next few months. So today is you've received the executive summary. SWAC members have received the executive summary. It's available online. You go through our website and go to the Manage the Future portal, and you'll see the executive summary there available. And that does a quick kind of recap of the 14 technical areas that were under review over these last several months. So today, those are the findings of those technical reviews are going to be reported out in summary form, and questions can be asked. Some of the technical consultants are here with us or online, but Ryan will be doing that presentation. In our March meeting, prior to that meeting, you'll receive copies of the full report. And that report will also be available to the public in advance of the meeting, at least a week in advance, and hopefully a couple weeks in advance. And so we'll be here at the SWAC having discussions, answering questions, in a full review of that meeting. That meeting for SWAC members is an extended meeting, so we're planning it from 9 till noon. Okay, so it's a 3-hour meeting.
In March.
In March, sorry. Yeah, what did I say?
Yeah, that's not it. Don't check.
Yeah, sorry, in March. And then in April, we will continue the discussion with hopefully the committee being able to come to making a recommendation of the preferred site to refer to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration. The Board of County Commissioners will actually have, I believe, 2 public hearings on this prior to making their selection of the site for staff to move forward on the review with. So that process will take, we figure, May into June for the Board of County Commissioners. After that, then if there is a recommended site to move forward with, then there's a full kind of land use zoning review, and that's a public process. We'll go through several public hearings, as well as the Department of Environmental Quality permitting process, which also is a full public hearing, public review process. So that's kind of how that lays out over the next couple of months and next couple of years, frankly.
So right now, does it look like the April meeting will be the last SWAC committee meeting on this whole
Yeah,
site?
yeah, unless we need to extend it. So, yeah, at this point, that would be the last meeting of the SWAC, unless the SWAC wanted to have a meeting after the Board of County Commissioners for the debrief and next steps, but. All right.
and just as a side note, the March and April meetings are scheduled downtown at the Deschutes Services Building.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, we expect that there's going to be pretty significant public interest as we get into these next 2 discussions. All right, with that, let me hand it to you.
All right.
We just noticed that the presentation wasn't loaded on here. Yeah, so Sue, can you give Dwight sharing permission? We'll share it with his computer.
What is he logged in under?
D Miller. Actually, I, as G Miller twice on there, I think. So not the road department one, but the one that just came on.
The presentation is also on a drive on that computer as well.
Where's it take? You know where it is, Sue?
It's on the jump drive, so if you open
Oh.
my computer and then it'll have the
Yes.
agenda and a presentation.
Good morning. Thank you. All right.
And Sue, noted that SWAC member Mike Riley has entered, he's here now.
Okay, so I need to share the screen so everyone else can see this. And here we are. Does everyone see this online?
Yes.
All right. Great, well, thanks for your patience on that. So yeah, this is the process that Tim was just describing. The pathway to SWAC recommendation and then commissioner selection of a preferred site. Public comments. And so at this time, we'll go through the findings of on each site with respect to 14 different categories of study. Thanks to everyone for your patience as we've been taking a deep dive regarding the two sites. We're excited to share what we found. So here's the map of the two sites. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. As a refresher, Moon Pit. You can see there near the edge of the Badlands Wilderness area on Highway 20. And then the Rock East site here in the Milliken Valley, north of Pine Mountain, south of Highway 20. Yeah. So first we'll look at the conceptual facility layouts. Here you can see a rendering of the Moon Pit landfill plan. And the Rock East site. You can see there's a unique shape here dictated by the property shape. Not quite as efficient, lower capacity to do acreage ratio in this case. Rock East allows for a nice square shape, which is more efficient from a capacity standpoint. So at Moon Pit, some of the challenges are the unfavorable geometry and rocky conditions. As noted, there's lower capacity to acreage ratio, so less solid waste can fit in each acre of footprint, so to speak. Here, there's cell one, which is the initial cell that would be developed up front, shown blown up here, and then the larger plant here. It's been broken up into 3 phases. The first is serving the county, would serve the county about 41 years. The second, 26 years, and then the last phase, 33 years. The disposal area is 346 acres, and the available airspace is estimated to be 64 million cubic yards.
Would you like us to ask questions as we go along, or?
I would think so. What do you think?
We do have a lot to go through. So maybe you can note them down at the end and we can jump back. Just want to make sure we can get through it all.
Yeah.
It's quite the stack we've got here. But yeah, happy to answer questions. So yeah, you can see the shape here. There are a lot more leachate lines here. I think we've got about 10 or more at this site, just given the unique shape. So there's additional costs associated with additional leachate pumps.
And leachate for people who don't know is the liquid or fluid that's down, that percolates down through the fill mass and is captured and either recirculated or disposed of.
So that was the subgrade plan. This is the fill, finished grade plan here. So, yeah, just to kind of give a sense of preliminary design. The report will have the full plans available, and this is just a high level snapshot. So then here's a view of Rock East, and it's broken up into 4 phases. First cell would be this portion of phase 1. It has a favorable square geometry and very favorable soils as well, a mix of sands and gravels. The geotechnical experts will share more about later. Pretty interesting site with good soil that would be easily excavated with conventional equipment without the need for drilling and blasting. Disposal area here is 387 acres with the available airspace of 80 million cubic yards. So remember, Moon Pit was 346. With 387 acres, there's a lot more capacity there, solid waste. And it's broken up into 4 phases, each serving between 23 and 33 years, for a total of 113 years. And this could also be easily expanded horizontally or vertically if needed to extend. One other thing to note with Moon Pit, the existing access road, gate, scales, and well could help reduce site development costs to some extent. So there's a benefit there, having that infrastructure already in place. Also, the mined areas do provide some quote free airspace to help reduce initial excavation needs. Although the prevalence of shallow bedrock at the site would increase excavation costs, the potential for synergistic mining operations presents an opportunity to further subsidize the cell excavation costs. That's a look at the conceptual landfill design. So next we'll look at zoning, site zoning and development permitting assessment. Moon Pit Space Zone is SM, surface mining, with following overlays: wildlife area, combining zone, and surface mining impact zone. Current use is an active surface mine, owned and operated by Hooker Creek. The surrounding area consists of the Oregon Badlands Wilderness and associated trails, trailhead, Badlands Rock Trailhead, Dry River, Canyon Trailhead, and public lands completely surround the site. It also is nearby the Bend Aero Modelers site, that's southeast, roughly a mile or so. And then there's the ODOT stockyard as well along the highway. For Rock East, the base zone is exclusive farm use, Horse Ridge, with the overlays of landscape management, combining zone, sage-grouse habitat area, low density, surface mining impact area, and wildlife area combining zone. Current use is rural undeveloped grazing land, surrounding area, rural residential properties, OHV trails, the Deschutes National Forest, and the Pine Mountain Conservatory. For Moon Pit, there's 3 potential pathways that have been identified for permitting the landfill use. The first is to rezone from SM to MUA 10. That would require demonstration that protected mineral resource has been exhausted. The second would be a text amendment in the Deschutes comprehensive plan to allow the landfill use as a reclamation use. That would require coordination with Ogami and DLCB. It would maintain the SM zone and the SMIA combining zone. It would require 2 separate hearings, hearings officer first and the board of commissioners. The third is to create a landfill overlay for the site. And this would require a text amendment to the county code and an adoption of an overlay to the site. According to county planning, the overlay should have happened before the siting process, and overlays are typically used to limit uses on properties, not authorize special uses on particular properties. And as far as permits go, the conditional use permit would be required, county site plan review. Because the access road to the site for BLM runs through BLM land, BLM right of way, it's anticipated that a NEPA review could be triggered by the change in use or additional use based on conversations with BLM. And that could be either an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, which would take an estimated 2 to 5 years. to get through, so that presents a substantial schedule risk for this site. Natural resource permits and related to the wildlife impacts and mitigation, Oregon DEQ solid waste disposal permit and a Dogami permit. If there's to be mining occurring concurrently. For Rock East, landfilling or a landfill would be a conditional use under EFU zoning. And given that it's a non-farm use, a farm impacts test would be required. And that is something that could lead to loop of appeals. So there's a risk of that potential schedule delay. Permits, pretty much all the same permits, or similar permits there. Conditional use, county site plan review, landscape management review, natural resource permits, and DQ, solid waste disposal permits. So that's comparison of the permitting pathway for the two sites.
You just want to say what LUBA stands for,
The Land Use Board of Appeals.
and that's state.
Yeah. It seemed from conversations with planning, it seemed that option 2, that would be a viable option to explore. But it still warrants further exploration. So transportation system assessment, Kittleson and Associates studied this component of the work and estimated that there'd be at the outset 7 employee trips and approximately 35 haul trucks per day. There's an established site access currently used by heavy vehicles for quarry operations out to Moon Pit, approximately 1.2 miles long. And there's currently estimated to be approximately 20 mining truck trips per day on average. So there is currently a baseline use of that access road. And I think that translates to, a vehicle every 12 minutes or so, 15 minutes on average. It's spread over. Okay, so relatively light. There's a shared access with Badlands. The Badlands Rock Trailhead. So left here, you enter the site, approaching Moon Pit. The current right of way, 30 feet wide with a 28-foot wide road, adequately designed and built to support heavy traffic. And our understanding is that a NEPA process would be triggered and required if additional right of way is needed. And there's potential for it to be assigned, as it has been several times before, through ownership changes, and so that's something we'll explore further with BLM to better understand what might be triggered by an assignment as it relates to the changes in use of the road. And it was recommended or suggested that an enhanced acceleration lane on US 20 may be beneficial, just to help trucks get up to speed as they go up the hill. The grade goes up in either direction to the east and west. For Rock East, the same anticipated trips for employees and truck trips. With just this on site, that's roughly 15 minutes, a truck every 15 minutes averaged out over the day. So relatively light. Several options were explored for access to the site, ranging from 1.2 miles, the most direct route, to 2.9 miles for more indirect routes. And the goal was to, there's kind of a different range of trade-offs in regard to route length, connection point to US 20, avoidance, BLM land, and limiting the overall grade along the route. The steep bridge here that would need to be navigated with these 3 routes. And there's 2 routes here that would avoid this shared access on Pine Mountain Road, which could be beneficial to limit conflict or any perceived conflict between the landfill and adjacent uses. So they could have there could be a dedicated access route with Route 3 and 4. The estimated cost for these relates to distances. Estimating the shortest route cost approximately 1.2 million to construct, and the longer routes closer to 2.9. Relatively flat overall, some areas that have up to an 8 to 10% grade. The new access points to the east, we need to consider available site distance as well, given the curve, so. Vertical as well. For water infrastructure, both sites are within the groundwater study area. And because of this, the timeframe for securing and mitigating for new water rights permits may be extended beyond 2029. We learned recently that OWRD is currently in a basin-wide pause and not reviewing or processing water rights applications. So that'll be an obstacle to work through. The good news at Moon Pit is that there are established water rights and 2 wells on site. Wells A and B are both located about 186 feet apart near the entrance of the site. The well depths range from 931 feet below grade surface for well A and 1,135 feet below grade for well B. Static water levels around 851 feet. Well A is not in use, but well B is in use and capable of producing 1,000 gallons per minute, which is more than enough to support landfill water needs. Well B has a water right permit with a priority date back in 1994 for dust control and gravel washing max use rates of 175,000 GPD and 529,000 GPD, which is plenty. The beneficial use area encompasses the site tax lot boundary, so that would work well for the site in terms of water. Although transfer of the water rights is not offered with the property acquisition, the seller is willing to lease a partial water right to the county for landfill operational needs at a reasonable cost until the county can secure its own water rights. The estimated cost for water rights permitting for the county to secure its own water rights and mitigate for those, and to upgrade the wells and install water system upgrades for distribution and whatnot, is estimated at $665,000. Now for Roth East, there's an existing well referred to as the Powell or Deep well located near the southwest corner of the tax lot right here. It's 995 feet deep with a static water level around 970 feet. It's currently used to supply a residence. I think that's Steve's house.
And it didn't freeze this winter, so I'm very happy.
And stock watering. And the well report indicates it can produce 50 gallons per minute with no drawdown. So that's good. Problem is there's no water rights pertinent to the deep well, the tax lot. And additional water rights would be needed to support the peak water demands that would occur between March and October. And so in order to supplement the water supply that's available from an exempt well being limited to 5,000 gallons per day, it's assumed that water trucks from NOT would be needed to supplement that supply and meet the elevated water demands. Would be needed. That is until water rights could be secured for the property. And it can be supplied on site. So a bit of a temporary. It may be possible to purchase and transfer water rights from an existing water rights holder in the vicinity at some point, but it could take some time. It may not be available initially. So there's a risk of that. The estimated cost for water rights permitting and water system upgrades at the Roth East side are estimated at approximately $1,090,000. Yeah. And then the estimated depth of groundwater, we'll get into this more in the hydro geology slide, but this is several hundred feet higher than these wells, and so it's estimated the groundwater around the site is at least 450 feet below grade, 450, 500 in that range. So for electrical infrastructure, let's see, Yeah, I think we hit that, so it's a little.
Check chest, hold on a sec.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. We'll bring in, Sean when we get there. So, an electrical power supply would be needed, for the site. To run the office buildings, maintenance buildings, scale house, the leachate pumps. But there's also the potential for up to 5 megawatts of power generation, long-term landfill gas. And potentially solar, and so that's what has been the basis of discussions with CEC for line sizing and high-level cost estimation. And an on-site substation would be needed to support that. And so the electrical infrastructure need would be to extend three-phase power approximately 9.5 miles from the existing three-phase connection point at Dodge Road. That's the nearest that three-phase power is available. So that would involve an upgrade to existing power lines, approximately 2.6 miles, and then an extension of new three-phase power line, approximately 6.9 miles along Highway 20 and then along the BLM access road. Easements that may be required through BLM property to get to the site, and there's a long lead time for materials. The estimate of probable cost that that was confirmed with CEC, just for at this planning level, is approximately $2 million. So fairly substantial electrical infrastructure cost committed given the long run. Roughies, the requirements are similar for the site, but the extension is much shorter. Be an extension of three-phase power, just 2.3 miles from the existing overhead power lines here. I think it's near Jordan Lincoln Road, going up to the north. So that would involve upgrading existing power lines to three-phase 1.2 miles, and then an extension of three-phase power, either overhead or under 1.1 miles to the site. And the estimated cost for that is $700,000. I think this is you guys made.
So now you get to listen to me a little bit. So flood risk, not a lot of direct flood risk at these two sites. They are outside of the Dry River for the most part. The area right through here down by Moon Pit is the closest that the floodplain for Dry River is to either of the sites. And not actually touching the sites. What's probably more of an issue at both of these sites is the contributory area above the sites as far as flood risk runoff from those upper areas. That's pretty standard at landfill sites, and so you do appropriate ditching and routing of water around your sites, and that's totally possible at both of these sites. It's not constricted as far as being able to route water around the sites. It's primarily just just ephemeral or dry stream beds or dry washes through those areas where it's an issue. Probably the biggest issue here from a flood standpoint is the secondary flood risk for Rockies. And that's just because Highway 20 is kind of woven underneath by the floodplain here, and very high flood and a floodplain issue that could impact Highway 20. That's a pretty low risk. I'm not exactly sure if, how all of those bridges have been designed, but my guess is that, that being a major highway, that it's probably pretty much, safe and not too prone to issues of the secondary flood risk. And being a major US highway, it's going to be put back into service fairly quickly, if there is an issue. It's not like it's a small county road or something that's could be impacted. So that's kind of the flood risk issues. So not all that significant at either site.
Yeah, if that were to flood, that would feel like a biblical event.
Yes, it would. Yeah, Dry River would be really flooding, it would not be Dry River. And this kind of goes back to the point of the kind of the topography around the sites and. While this is shows blue, this is not a running stream, it's pretty much a dry wash down into Dry River. And then the same for up at Rock, and like I say, those are manageable. And, you know, all the systems, the statutory requirement for flood control, you run on of water is a 25-year storm. We typically design them for 100-year or more now, just because of the, it doesn't take that much more of an effort, and it just gives you that much more assurance that you're not going to be impacted by the floods. So geology and groundwater. So on the geology part, I'm gonna let the folks from GEL deal with most of that. What I do want to point out is some of the issues as far as groundwater. Ryan kind of hit on a lot of this, but so for Moon Pit, we're looking at groundwater about 850 feet below ground surface. That's what the BGS is. The on-site well, it's got good quality water, good flow. It's a pretty good water source from the standpoint of water supply. The great depth to groundwater is pretty good assurance for protection of groundwater as well. So, you know, to the point that low risk of groundwater contamination, somewhat by the depth of the geology, but probably even more so just because there is a very low amount of leachate that would be generated at either of these sites. I mean, they're less than 12 inches of rain a year. And so it's, you know, relatively dry, low amount of leachate actually generated at either of these sites. You know, we put in at sites like this, we put in, you know, the statutory requirement of the drainage systems and all that, and rarely do we see much leachate come out of them. And what leachate we do have, we can almost always recirculate back in, which is actually is enhancing the landfill from a decomposition standpoint. So that they stabilize that way. So at Rock East, you know, it's very deep alluvial deposit out there, so much different geology. The groundwater protection is possibly a little bit better here rather than at a bedrock site where you could have fractures in the bedrock that could allow more groundwater penetration, so to speak. But still great depth to groundwater. 450 plus feet, you know, could be perched groundwater in there, but that would require additional, and it probably has a feel for that too. You know, as far as, you know, what the potential is for that. But, you know, the quality of groundwater again at these sites is very good. And the product, the yield is not fully known. I mean, the on-site well is 50 GPM, not sure beyond that. How much water could be provided for it, but again, no water rights available at this time for Rock East, and so that's why, for the purposes of our work, we actually have water being hauled out to the site from here from Knott. So that brings us to Dell's presentation, geotech and geology.
Hey, Sean, jump on.
Sean, I'll go for it, yeah. Sean, we can click through as you request. Might need to be unmuted. So can you?
I think students do that.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, there we go. I had to rejoin as a panelist. Yeah, so we'll go through real quick the geology at Moon Pit from a geotech standpoint. We have shallow bedrock conditions throughout the entire site. This site's positioned within a fault-bound grobman, which means the entire site's down dropped over time. These faults are now presumed to be inactive. The surface cover as it exists today throughout most of the site is a loess, which is like a wind-blown sediment that's been deposited throughout the site, as well as slope wash that's come down from the north, or I guess that's the southeast. Historically, this site was mined to the northwest as an aggregate mine with gravels. We don't have a whole lot of data about the quality of bedrock here, but we do know that after the gravels were mined out in the northwest, Hooker Creek attempted to drill and blast aggregate for use and sale, and there's a lot of variability within that, and they ended up halting that work and moving down to the southeast instead. Our observations from doing field work out there is that there's a lot of variability within that gravel pit the drilled and blast area to the northwest. And we don't have any information about the quality of rock out here based on laboratories testing or standards. So it's really unknown how this rock could be used at this point without additional site characterization. So we can go to the next slide now. Oh, all right. So I didn't know this slide was in here. This is just an example of what the bedrock conditions look like at Moon Pit. So to the right, you can see a very thin veneer with the roots coming through it. That's kind of a sandy material. That's the loess I was talking about. It's wind blown or derived from slope wash. And underneath that, where you see all that boulder, cobbly material, that's the upper weathering profile of the underlying rock mass. And the left there, that's just conventional equipment that we use for excavating test pits, attempting to dig into this. And what we encountered was that, as expected, you can't get far with conventional equipment out here. Okay, next slide. And that's again showing the contact between the bedrock and then where we had equipment refusal. And we can skip past this one now. Okay, so these are kind of our preliminary conclusions from working on this. We're gonna have shallow bedrock conditions throughout the entire site. Drilling and blasting will be required for excavating to the depth of the waste cells, and the faults are likely inactive within the last 12,000 years, which would be of concern if they were active, but there's no supporting data for that. Next slide. Okay, so over here at the Rothy site, we have very different site conditions. The site's positioned on an alluvial fan, which is material sourced from an upslope catchment basin that's delivered into a lower angle valley, and it creates kind of this fan radial pattern that comes out. We characterize the site by drilling, or I'm sorry, our preliminary characterization of this site was completed by drilling 3 borings along geophysical transects. And the purpose of this was to essentially establish an estimated depth of bedrock and understand what the materials were encountered between bedrock and the upper ground surface. And what we encountered was that bedrock is on the order of 400 feet below ground surface, and our targeted depths for these borings only went to 100 and 150 feet. So we didn't encounter bedrock, but what we did encounter was predominantly coarse grained soils consisting of sands and gravels. Now, this is an important piece of information because that material, as well as the Moon Pit, can be used potentially with lab testing and analysis as aggregate for site development. And one other thing to note is we did not encounter groundwater at this time. The other thing I'll show you about the slide is that blue line to the bottom right. That's a mapped fault trace within the USGS Quaternary Fault and Fold database. We are projecting that fault trace to the northwest along what we're calling the knob. And through our preliminary work, we've established that we're not seeing any movement of that fault within the last 12,000 years. So again, that's that key age I brought up when we were looking at Moon Pit as well. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So this is just an example of what exploration looked like out there, drilling. And to the bottom here, this is an example of the geophysical profile that was generated. And I believe to the left, that would be the southwest, and to the right is the northeast on that transect. And what we see, the key thing to note here is we have the borings plotted on here right around the 200 or 2100 mark. You see B2, and then at the 2500 mark, or I think it's 2700 mark, you see B1, but you kind of lose the one there. What is important to note about this is where you see these hot colors at depth, and that's a pretty thick accumulation of alluvial fan material. And so our current interpretation right now is that if you begin excavating out here, you're going to be maintaining your excavation within this material. You're not going to be going deep enough to be encountering bedrock. And because of the geomorphic signature of that alluvial fan, we're interpreting right now that it's going to be predominantly coarse-grained gravels and coarse-grained sands and materials of that like. You can go to the next slide. Oh, so yeah, this is just annotating maximum depth drilled 150 feet, and that's our bedrock contact interpreted from the geophysics. Go ahead and click again, Ryan, or whoever's controlling. Thank you. All right, so again, to reiterate, we have about 400 feet of sediment underlying the site that's predominantly gravels. The gravels could be used as aggregates pending further investigation, laboratory testing, and analysis. We anticipate that you can use conventional equipment to excavate out here, and our current interpretation of that fault that we're projecting through the site's greater than 12,000 years in age. Next slide, if there is one. That's it.
So one thing I did want to point out, he notes this, materials could be used for site development, and that's really a critical point of any landfill is that, to the extent that you can use on-site materials for your development, that's a key point. And so those are used for like the leachate drainage layer at the bottom. It's used for operations, so for your daily and intermediate cover needs, and for your roads and final cover and topsoils for your final cover. So there's a lot of soil materials that go back into the landfill for development as well as for operations. And so that's why that we make a big point of that on these sites. And that is a key differentiator between Moon Pit and Roth is the availability of that material and how difficult it is to develop that resource. Moon Pit is a blast and excavate type site, whereas Roth is pretty much conventional. Excavation can be used out there for that site, which makes it much less expensive. And you'll see that later in some of our discussions here. So I have a few more things to go over. So we did a phase 1 environmental site assessment. This is what you do for any site that you're purchasing. And so we wanted to do this just to see if there was any issues at any of these sites. There really isn't anything. There's at Moon Pit, there's a little bit of the fact that there's a boneyard out there, old equipment, old stuff, as well as diesel above ground storage tanks. Those are always kind of flags, and so you look at them, but we didn't see anything deleterious from those. There's an original ranch house, that might have some hazardous materials in it, so nothing significant. And so we actually determined no recognized environmental conditions, which is a term used in these site assessments. And so no further investigation is really required at the site for that purpose. Roth East, even more so, there's very little development has happened at that site. And so again, we didn't really have any recognized environmental conditions there. So air quality and weather summary. Air quality, mainly just kind of what's the ambient air quality there. We're bringing in a facility and don't want to impact the air quality. So that's the reason we just kind of take a quick look at it, and more can be done in site development.
But pretty straightforward as far as, conditions out there. The PM 2.5, which is the super fine dust, or particulate matter, that around here, that really hits during the wildfire season, not wildflower season, fire season. And so that's, actually the peaks of that, and we see this throughout, Central Oregon. It was from the Labor Day fires of, 2020. Where, as you might recall, the beautiful sunsets at that time. So no other air quality facilities, or in that area, and no sensitive receptors identified within the area. Probably more important to hear is also just from a weather standpoint. So, we're looking at 12 inches of precipitation or less than 12 inches of precipitation. As I noted before, that's really important from the standpoint of site operations and handling of leachate and handling of liquids at the site. So beneficial from that standpoint. And a lot of that actually, more than half of it falls from November to February. And as we know, a good chunk of it falls to snow. And so it tends to be more of an operational issue of having to deal with snow during operations. And Tim can probably remember times out here where it was a challenge with snow. But typically it's not a huge issue. So one other thing that we did want to note is the greenhouse gas emissions profiles for the two sites. Ryan will get into this somewhat from an operation cost standpoint, but Roth East having somewhat higher emissions, and that's due to the longer haul. So that longer haul is, more fuel, more cost, more emissions. And so that's why you see the peak there. So what we did is we broke that out, what could likely happen as far as rolling stock and hauling of materials. So likely diesel in the early years, renewable natural gas from the site in the intermediate years, and then likely electric after that. And that's actually as solar comes on at the site, on developed sites are closed. And so just to give you kind of an idea of how that can impact the site. But the real point here is, going from diesel into the renewable natural gas and electricity, it really does reduce the overall emissions, from the site. So the natural resource assessment was the next thing we did, and so Roth East, as it been mentioned, it's a sagebrush steppe environment out there, 309 acres intact of that habitat. At Moon Pit, about 177 acres of disturbed juniper woodland, so a different type of habitat and heavily disturbed at Moon Pit because there's already been a Moon Pit there. And the other activities around that site. As far as the resources at the site, no waters or jurisdictional wetlands on either of the sites. As we noted, it's dry stream beds at best around the sites. No, and this is a different ESA. This is an Endangered Species Act listed species are likely to occur on Roth East or Moon Pit sites. And this is based both on sidewalk as well as databases that were evaluated for that. Golden eagle nest within two miles of Moon Pit. That would likely require an incidental take permit from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's not to say that you're taking the eagle out, but it could be impacted, so they require that you go through the permitting process. As was noted before, the wildlife combining zones here, both sites are in wildlife combining zones. And there's no mitigation required for this designation, but it'll be addressed within the land use permitting. And so going through the land use permitting process will require some, you know, likely some mitigation to occur. A few other things, so, big game category 2 habitat, so, elk, mule, pronghorn. And so these aren't super clear, you'll see these more in the reports that you'll see later, but, kind of how they overlay on the sites here. Mitigation is land acquisition, conservation, and enhancement. Similar costs between the two sites here. Sage grouse habitat, on the other hand, there's an in lieu fee for that, so for a mitigation bank. Moon Pit has a fairly small area compared to Roth East, which has a larger area. And so the mitigation costs are quite a bit higher for Roth East as opposed to Moon Pit for that.
I can comment on the specifics. There's a range of what mitigation could cost. But what our natural resource experts provided for kind of estimates, singular numbers to represent the level of habitat impact and mitigation costs for each site was 700,000 upfront for Moon Pit, with up to 800,000 in operations and maintenance costs for those mitigation sites over 50 years. And then at Roth East, the estimated cost of mitigation for potential impacts is 1.5 million, with up to 2.5 million in operations and maintenance costs for those mitigation sites to keep them in good shape. So just kind of gives you a sense proportionally of what the mitigation costs could be, and that's a reflection of the habitat impacts through the habitat quantification tool that ODFW that they work with ODFW on, looking at what's the condition of the existing habitat there now, how, and then they quantify the functional loss of habitat as a result of putting in roads, power lines, site development, noise, things like that. So it's kind of a holistic and quantified look at habitat impacts.
You know, one other thing I do want to note on both these sites, and this goes with any landfill, is that you don't have 300 acres open at one time. It is a case of development over time. And so you bring an area up, you fill it, you close it, and then you move on, and you kind of continue to move on through the rest of your site. So as those areas are restored, in many cases, those actually can go back to much more of a natural environment. And I mean, I've seen sites, well, and you see some out here on closed areas of knot where, you know, native vegetation has come back, and you know, those can be enhanced. And so I do kind of want to make a point that, you know, no, this isn't just one big, you know, hole in the ground that's put out there, and so it's impacting all that area. It can actually be developed in such a way that you are restoring as you go, and that's the whole point with these. And you'll see that at other large regional sites as well. So next up was cultural resources. So we looked at cultural resources at both sites. So these are reconnaissance surveys. They are not intense surveys, but they're fairly, I mean, they're not the full-on survey that would typically be done, but they are what's kind of called a pedestrian walk survey. So they actually cover pretty much all the area out there. It just happens to be kind of wider transects or wider paths that they take through. And identified 5 archaeological resources, 3 pre-contact sites, meaning pre-European settlement, and 2 historic isolates. And so those are post-European settlement and historic, so over 75 years old, likely. So, you know, lots of areas like at Moon Pit are impacted by the mining quarry activities. And so, you know, those do not have much resource left, obviously, because they've been impacted already. So, those other areas, they do have some potential resources, the areas that have not yet been disturbed. So the recommendations, a more formal systematic survey of these areas, which we would go through on the selected site. And particularly those areas at Moon that had not yet been impacted, by the mining operations. If a resource will be impacted by the project, the resource of significance must be formally evaluated under Oregon state law. The state Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, has some very detailed approaches that you take for the permitting process, recording process, and then mitigation process for those. And part of the other thing that was used for the work that we did was other surveys that had been done either at these sites or in proximity of the sites to kind of get a general sense of what is out at these sites. You will notice in our reports, we do not show locations of any of the resources because we obviously want to preserve those resources. And so they are not shown so that people can't go back out there and find them. And that's the case. The databases are confidential databases that our archaeologists are able to see and know what's out there. So one of the points here was consideration for timeline. The permit process is fairly quick through the SHPO. But the process can take a while going out there, and in seasonality, you can't go out there when there's snow on the ground and so forth. For doing the work. So at Roth East, surveyed about 220 or 128 of the acres out there, identified 12 resources, 6 sites and 6 isolates. So these would be isolates with what we see here. The entire Roth East parcel has a high probability of archaeological resources, mainly because it hasn't been impacted by other activities out there, other than grazing and some of the light haul roads that are out there on the site. It's largely undisturbed. And so there is that potential. So recommendations, again, to do the more formal survey, likely there would be more items found at this site versus Moon Pit. But, mitigation can occur. That's all you do that through SHPO as well as through the tribes in this area. And we are in contact with tribal management on this as well. That brings us to community consideration.
I think Aubrey is gonna this one.
Yeah, so this is Aubrey online. So for community considerations, there's obviously been a public process as part of this siting evaluation, and we wanted to look back at some of the comments that have been received relative to both sites. Certainly with both Roth East and Moon Pit, we've heard some common considerations related to concerns around habitat and wildlife. But there are a few unique things relative to the two sites. So on the left, some of the interested parties that have shared comments for Moon Pits, recreation users, hikers, and bikers who use that Badlands Wilderness area. Of course, the public lands interests, and then additional environment, wildlife, and other interests have contributed. Some of the concerns that have been expressed, that access road that goes to the trailhead has been brought up in terms of safety, and also expressed opportunities with Moon Pits. There's a perception, I think this came up today in the comment period, that there's comparatively less change from the current use, and that's seen as a positive by some members of the community. And also the buffering of the kind of the topography and the lands around the Moon Pit site provides a bit more visual screening. I think we can go to the next slide. So for Roth East, We've also heard from Milliken Valley residents relative to this site and from users of Pine Mountain Observatory and recreation users. And in this case, paragliders are an added unique recreation use there. And then similar to both sites, these additional interests from environment, wildlife, and others. So for Roth East, some of the expressed concerns that have come up, this ties into a lot of the technical content that was shared today, but there's been some specifics around the kind of the windiness of that site causing, dust or litter or odor that would potentially impact residents nearby, or the Pine Mountain Observatory, the night sky conditions that has been shared through the comment period. We've also heard some expressed opportunities. So there's the conversations that have been had through the SWAC about the potential for purchasing larger property or adjacent properties and doing mitigation. And generally, with both of these sites, particularly early in the comments process, the public process for this, both sites are seen as, comparatively less populated, but still close enough in to, provide that haul route, the trade-offs there. So quick summary, I think we're almost at the end, so there's a cost up next.
Good, thank you, Aubrey. So now we'll take a look at the bill for these, so to speak. But first, what plays into this is the waste projections, which are driven by population projections. And so we base this on the population projections on population and waste projections on the solid waste management plan in 2019, the PSU 2020 annual population report tables, the coordinated population forecast for Deschutes County, prepared by PSU, the research center, and then recent material recovery and waste generation rates, rate reports provided by the department to DEQ on waste disposal volumes and recycling rate also part of that. And then recent 2022 not landfill tonnage analysis. So those are the sources of the waste and the basis of the waste projection. What you see here in red is the growth rate based on the coordinated population forecast for Deschutes County. It's up here near 2.25 now, and it's shown declining down to 1.1% and then holding steady from 2040 roughly on into the future. So our assumption was that there'd be a continuation of that 1.1% annual average growth rate for the basis of population projections. Let's see what else it's showing. And then the population forecast here in red. And then what's shown here is a mix of different graphs. This is the recovery rates, the percentage of the waste that is diverted for recycling. And it's currently around 29%. But the assumption is that there will be steady progress made at 1% per year up to the goal of 45% in 2038, which is a state level goal for recycling recovery rate, and then holding at that. And so there's that's an assumption for that, and you'll see that results in a decrease of waste disposal, and that's this brown line tipping downward as a result of more recycling. Correct. So that takes more, that reduces the amount of volume going to the landfill. And you can see waste recycled tipping up at that same time. And those are both driven by this recovery rate. And then the waste generation is shown here. See the decreased slope is because, the rate of increase of waste disposal because of the improvement of recycling and recovery rate flattens that curve, and then it picks back up once it stabilizes, tracked with population. So that's the basis of that. And we're also assuming that the current per capita waste generation rate, the garbage generated per person of 3,050 pounds per person per year will remain steady through the planning period. Could go up, could go down. But that's the assumption we'll take for the purpose of waste projections. And this then drives into costs because waste generation and the phasing that we've done in the design provides certain amount of airspace. And the rate of waste disposal and the density of that waste drives how quickly that landfill cells are used. And when new development would be needed to expand the landfill and develop additional cells. So that's the reason for that background.
And
so,
one thing I would note in that is that's kind of the quote unquote worst case. And so that's kind of what you designed to, as far as the volume that you need to provide capacity for. And so, if recycling rates go up, if material recovery rates go up, that could, that amount needed could go down. One nice thing about a landfill is you don't have to build it as big as we project if you don't generate as much. And so that's kind of the point, is to make sure you've got enough, but hope that you can kind of reduce that down through the different activities that they're taking on here.
yeah, thank you. So there's a lot more detail for this that'll be provided in the draft reports. Many detailed tables laying out the costs over the lifespan. But this just provides a high-level summary in comparison of the two sites. And so the initial site acquisition cost for Moon Pit ranges between 15.37 million and 15.87 million. And that depends on the option of an excavation agreement that could reduce the price by the 500 there. So slight variation in option there in price. For Roth East, there were 3 different options presented, but the one that was favorable to the county, $5.5 million for acquisition of all of the Roth East parcel and the portion of the Roth West parcel that was considered earlier on, which is just east of Pine Mountain, for the purpose of mitigation, to have an area to mitigate and improve habitat on property owned by the county. And that I think results in roughly 2,000 acres or 2,250 acres around there. So a lot more elbow room.
Yeah, I think actually 2,700.
Oh, 2,700. Yeah. So that also helps just provide more buffer. Say, and more access routes as options. Now, the initial development cost is quite different between the two sites. And that is largely driven by the cell development cost per acre. And that's the cost to create the landfill cells. It's higher at Moon Pit because of the drilling and blasting that would be needed to excavate the cells. And the range presented here depends on the extent of aggregate mining that is done as a part of the excavation, and to the degree to which that can subsidize the cost of excavation by extracting the aggregate resource. And that would be done in participation with mining contractors, Tucker Creek and others for various areas. So that's in comparison to the 393,000 per acre at Roth East. As was described, there's sand and gravel predominantly at Roth East, and simple conventional excavation equipment can be done to excavate that. And part of that assumption is that 2/3 of the cell excavation would occur as a part of daily cover borrow operations at Roth East. So what that means is as cover is needed to cover up the working phase in the landfill for each day, that material can be grabbed from the next landfill cell and just moved over, and that can roughly excavate the next cell just through the process of grabbing cover to put on the working phase each day, daily cover. So there's some serious some big efficiencies with the Roth site in terms of the cell development costs. So that plays a big role in the initial development cost. And this does include the acquisition cost of top as well. So these aren't in addition. This is a part of the initial development cost. In the detailed cost estimates, you'll see all that's involved in the initial development cost. That's also the infrastructure, roads, water, electrical, etc. I believe mitigation is even in there.
It is, yeah.
So there's a lot that plays into that. But for Moon Pit, including acquisition costs, that's 50 to 64 million. And those costs would occur between 2024 and 2029. And it's estimated at 36 million for Rock East, 2024 to 2029. Now, there's an interesting difference that we noticed in operational costs when we accounted for the additional haul cost to haul out to Rock East. It's an extra 8 to 9 miles to go beyond the turnoff to Moon Pit and continue trucking up the hill. And so we did a detailed analysis of truck trips needed, truck time in terms of hours, and then applied an hourly rate of 160 an hour, which is was an agreed upon kind of assumption for the haul cost, and found that there's a difference in haul costs of roughly 800,000 per year. Annual haul cost at Moon Pit being 2.5 million per year, and then Rock East 3.3 million per year from all the various transfer stations to the two sites. And so that difference you can see reflected here as well. The extra 800,000 drives Rock East operational cost to 8.4 million per year, whereas Moon Pit's 7.6 million per year. And both of these account for operational costs. I mean, they're equal in terms of staff and equipment, but there are differences in the water costs. At Moon Pit, there would be a cost to buy the water from Hooker Creek, essentially. And then at Rock East, there's a cost to truck water from Knott, and those have both been accounted for. So there's some nuances there in terms of operational costs, but the big one is the additional haul costs. And that over time brings them closer in terms of overall cost, which is kind of the interesting nuance here. And so the average cost per ton over the lifespan for Moon Pit is estimated to range between $43 and $48 per ton. With Rock East, and that, again, that range depends on, the extent of mining, aggregate mining synergy, and how much that can help to reduce the excavation costs and subsidize them. With Rock East, it's a little more of a straightforward calculation. Estimated at $45 per ton over the lifespan, which is longer, 113 years of Rock East. And so we've got some of the assumptions listed there on the right. I guess the key one to point out is that we assume that 90% of the excavation at Moon Pit would require rock drilling, blasting, and processing at a cost of $12 per ton by the county. And that's what drives the higher end of the cost ranges for Moon Pit, is assuming the county's paying to chew that rock up, basically blow it up, chew it up. So it could use as cover or drain rock and other materials for site development, or on the low end, a discounted cost of $4 per ton for mining contractors to drill, blast, crush, and take a portion of it for sale.
Which is similar to what is happening out here at Knott now for development, where the rock is removed and under the mining permit.
To make sure I'm understanding this slide then, so this is basically taking all acquisition, mitigation, development, operational costs divided by the total projected tons. To get that price.
Yeah, over the full.
Over the full life.
Yeah.
In 100 years, 130 years.
That's true. That is the difference between the two. So that's the full lifespan average. And so just in summary, I guess this is how we would distill it at a high level, and between the two, Moon Pit's has higher acquisition and development costs, but lower annual operational costs, whereas Rock East has a lower acquisition cost and development costs, but higher annual operating costs due to the longer haul distance. As far as infrastructure, Moon Pit requires more electrical infrastructure, but less water and roadway infrastructure. For Rock East, more water and road infrastructure is needed, but less electrical infrastructure needed. With regard to environmental impact, there's somewhat similar concerns about cultural resource loss, although more areas have been impacted already at Moon Pit. Wildlife and recreational disruption. At Rock East, there's also concerns about cultural resources, perhaps somewhat greater because of the lower level of disturbance at that site. concerns about groundwater, maybe just slightly higher, given that it's not as deep and the soils are different. And wildlife, particularly sage grouse, is of greater concern at Rockies in terms of environmental impact. The public concerns, seems to be generally less concerned with visual and residential impacts at Moon Pit, but there are concerns raised about wildlife and impacts to the Badlands Wilderness areas. Now at Rockies, more concerned with visual and residential impacts, and similarly, there are concerns about habitat and wildlife there. And wildlife corridors, as have been raised today. Now risks, some risks to point out with Moon Pit are potential delays and conflicts due to land use approvals and NEPA process that may be required for the access road. There's also more of an upside and downside risk, I suppose, with the economic feasibility of aggregate mining to offset rock excavation costs. If the market isn't favorable, you know, when development needs to happen and the bulk of development, that could be a downside risk, and could lead to much higher excavation costs with less of a subsidy from aggregate mining. So there's some variability and risk to that that component. With Rockies, there's potential delays from appeals due to the farm tax tests. Higher susceptibility to high winds there, which is more of an operational challenge that can be overcome with high fencing around the working face, things like that. And also one thing that's not shown here, but I think it's worth noting, is the lack of water rights and water supply, adequate water supply at Rockies. So we've got there's a temporary workaround that would be available with trucking, but long term, that could be a limitation. So that's kind of our high level wrap on that, and all the different areas studied. So thanks all for bearing with us through all that content. And this is just a taster, because within a couple weeks, before the next meeting in March, we'll be providing the draft report, which will be hundreds, maybe 1,000 pages. So this is just an appetizer.
Go on detailed review of all that.
The whole meeting about it.
But this is the help kind of orient.
Yeah, so what you'll see is it gets a little bit more detailed. So obviously, you know, we really wanted to get this out, this comparison table to you so that you could really see, you know, kind of at a high level what the differences are between the sites. We'll have a summary report that'll be less than 100 pages likely, that will kind of bring all this together in narrative form and a lot of graphics and all for you. And then what bumps it up over 1,000 is when we add all of the discipline reports to that. Because every one of the disciplines put together a pretty exhaustive report on their findings. And so that's what's been distilled down into this. So we kind of just wanted to whet your appetite and then, you know, kind of build off of that for the next meeting.
So that I'd like to open it up for any of your initial questions. We have about 30 minutes, so I'm going to ask that the public that you allow the SWAC members to ask their questions. And if there's time permitting at the end, we'll open it up for the broad questions. Okay.
I have a bunch of clarifications, but I guess if somebody only has one or two, maybe they'll go first.
Well, I have one that's because I was gone for a period of time. The sites up north of Bend, what's the status of those? Are those still in the running or not at all?
No, they pulled out.
Okay.
I failed in my effort to put 97 back on.
I just have a couple quick questions. Regarding Moon Pit, you mentioned earlier that well A is not functioning, but well B is. So is that, I mean, always with it, it's not being used right now. I guess the question is, in the future, is well A available and functional? Or they're just not using it because they don't need the water now?
I think it needs some improvement. Scott?
So I work for Hooker Creek, so I can answer that. Well A and well B are basically side by side with each other. Well B is the bigger capacity wells. So well A still has the motor on it and the pump in it and could be turned on and functional, but we haven't turned it on in 20 years, so don't know. But will be, bigger casing, bigger capacity size, bigger motor, 1,000 gallon per minute capacity, works fine. And so, yeah, so there's no issue with water out there.
Got it. Good question. And then when we last spoke, we talked about all the different development sites, was Moon Pit was gonna be a lease, the county would lease the land. Now I'm assuming that may not be the case. Is it be a purchase or it will be leased?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. So we put out a solicitation to both of the property owners to ask for a purchase, as well as they can provide alternatives, so lease or what have you, and both have chosen to offer pure purchase of the sites.
Okay.
Part of that is for the Moon Pit site in particular, the benefit to the county of the purchase is that there is one single right-of-way access and permit. If we were to lease the property, then we'd probably have to get our own right-of-way. There is the possibility that of with the purchase that there is the assignment of that right-of-way, so you wouldn't have to go through the a full NEPA. We have to talk with BLM again around what that assignment looks like and the limitations to that. Within that purchase agreement with Moon Pit, there's two options. One is pure purchase and they're done with the site. A second would be a purchase with a reduction in price where they continue to do some mining under subcontract to remove and basically pre-excavate for the mining, and the land filling would then be entirely reclamation of that site.
That's a big change.
Yeah, and then with Roth, they offered a price for Roth East, a second price for Roth East, and about half of the Roth West property up to the Pine Mountain road, access road, and another price for buying both Roth East and Roth West. Okay, we've modeled it where we've purchased the property all the way to Pine Mountain Road. So we would have the opportunity for no grazing on that portion and do additional mitigation for sagegrass and other mitigation.
And those numbers are represented in that acquisition?
That's correct, yes.
But that acquisition offer does not include the transfer of the water rights.
That's so with Moon Pit, they're not offering the transfer of water right. They have the potential of doing development of another facility, mine potentially in the county. So there's a lot of value to them. They have offered the lease or sale of water up to a certain amount, that would be negotiated until such time as the county was able to procure its own water rights. So we would need to negotiate in that deal that we would be guaranteed that water until such time we were able to get
Um, so my understanding of Moon Pit was that it's we'd have sort of cooperative agreement where they would dig a hole and we would fill it. Sort of, is that still being thought of?
So there are a couple options there. Yes, if one of the purchase options is that they would do the continued excavation of rock, and they would have rights to that rock. Another way is that we purchase it without that saves about $500,000 in the purchase price. But if we chose not to, we could then put out RFPs and have other folks do that excavation.
So there's other ways of doing it.
There are other ways of doing it.
Just like you're currently doing it now.
Correct. That's exactly how we've been doing it.
And would the access road on the present access road be widened up? Or talking about BLM permit?
Yeah, it's currently, I believe, 28 feet. So that should be adequate. It's already using heavy
Okay.
vehicles on that road,
It seems like the higher acquisition costs from Moon Pit. I'm not fully understanding why it's so high, or wants more money, but is that, because it's to their advantage to go through with this, they don't have to do a rehabilitation plan. I assume all that is part of negotiations, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's, that's an active mine that has value. It's very difficult to try and site a new aggregate facility in this county. To permit it, it would take at least a decade or more. So there is a value of this business to I'm sure, and so that's, they give us the offer that they feel is appropriate for what they would be technically giving up.
Could be lower, but okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
Good point. So in this summary, you listed as a risk the economic feasibility of aggregate mining to offset excavation costs, but everywhere else it was described as an opportunity is what I remember from the rest of the presentation. So I'm wondering why it's shown up here as a risk. For the reasons you just said, I thought there was a lot of high value to
I think there
sites and aggregate volume across the region. So
yeah,
why
I think
is it
you
shown
heard from Sean, there's some risk potentially in the phase one area of the quality of that rock. And so what would the value of that be in the initial years? There's high value rock, it appears, towards the southeast portion of the property.
which is where they seem to have shifted their
Yeah.
plan to,
Yeah,
right?
so-
That indicates.
Yeah, so we, and it may be that they, as we work through if we were to operate on that site, it may be mining in both areas where they can extract value from the southeast and do kind of cell development work for us in the northwest. The risk is just, you're farther out from market. So depending on at the time of when we need excavation done, what are the market conditions? Is the economy here doing well? And there's a lot of projects going on, a lot of need for aggregate. Or is the economy not doing well at the time that we need that work done? So it's variable. We believe that there's value in that rock, but we can't guarantee it to the ratepayers. So that's why we give that range. I think the other thing to note relative to that cost is, when you do the development of a facility and if it's 50 million for one and 35 million for the other, the first 20 years of the project is we're going to bond this project to do this development. Those bonds are going to get paid off most likely in a 20-year note. So there is a differential cost in those first 20 years of operation. It'll be more expensive to operate out at the Moon Pit site, whether they're doing excavation or not. But down the road, in the long run, it would be a potentially cheaper site to operate. So that'll be something that we'll be talking about, I think, in subsequent meetings. But I think it will be something we note for the Board of County Commissioners that in the near term, Moon Pit would be a more expensive facility to dispose at. In the long term, it has the potential, over 100 years to be more cost effective, but we won't get that benefit for the first 20 years.
This is Sean Cordes. One thing I wanted to chime in about here is we don't know the lateral extent of poor quality rock at Moon Pit. That's a complete unknown right now. All we know is that in one corner you have poor rock and in another corner you have decent rock. And we don't know the quality of the rock that's presumed to be decent as well. So that there's a real data gap here and understanding what that rock could be used for and if it could be if there is a resale value. And one other thing I wanted to point out is if we're playing the game of assuming that you have aggregates at one location that could be sold, it should really be applied to both, because the way we view it is that Roth East is a potential aggregate resource as well, and that doesn't seem to be accounted for, or at least maybe I missed that.
I think maybe it's thinking of it as an opportunity. We talk about getting a new Degami permit as a decade process. We're at 113 years at Roth. You could even stockpile potential aggregate for 10 years that could be then processed and sold. So it might be a consideration in the cost of development that, you know, in the life of a project, it's a pretty good chance you could get that permitted. And if it is quality material, you know, we've mined gravel, sand and gravels out here for a long time.
Yeah, so that's not been built into this model for Rockies, in terms of any value built into that rock.
Would SM zoning be required for the Dogoning permit?
I would assume so, yeah. So again, you know, it's a timeline standpoint, but I think, you know, in the life of the project, that's still relatively short duration.
Zoning change.
We, if I go to a different topic, it's not clear to me if water rights are a fatal flaw in either one of these properties. I mean, trouble getting them with a piece of gate.
We haven't indicated them as a fatal flaw, it's just, it's going to be a cost. We have water and access to water here, if not, that we would have to.
Trucking.
Yeah, so it has an environmental impact, greenhouse gas and cost impact.
Okay. Has Dry River flooded in the last 100 years? Do we know that? Or Highway 20? I don't think so, but I just wondered.
You might have to check with the ODOT maintenance.
Well, I've been out there since '80s, and I've never seen water running in there. When Stephen bought 240 acres, the title company used it as an exception item, saying the public had a right to the high water mark. So I offered to go find a beat up old junked boat and put it down in the bottom there with a pirate flag on it. And it's kind of, you know, because I never see, I see more water running down Pine Mountain Road than I do in the actual river.
And the Golden Eagle, that's gonna be impacted by existing money. They continue, we don't, you know, if this site is not used for them, maybe that should be noted that. I don't know if there'd be a change really in how that eagle is impacted, it's just who's gonna make that impact.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what needs to be studied, is the change of use, would that have a different impact? You know, there is the truth of what is in a landfill where it is waste, there's some putrescible waste, so does that create a new attractant? Which would be of impact on the Golden Eagle compared to just a mine.
And then I think for the Moon Pit, the mule deer, pronghorn, sage grouse values are maybe overstated in reality. I mean, on broad maps, they're shown as being part of zones, but at least what I've seen in that area, I can't believe that'd be high value thing in those three.
For Moon Pit, did you say?
Yeah, for Moon Pit. The petroglyphs and Moon Pit are somewhere I mentioned in there, but they're a little bit downstream. Site. And it'd be, is there gonna be any discussion of moving that trailhead a little closer to Highway 20 for the public, so they're a little more removed from Moon Pit?
We haven't had any discussion with BLM on that, but that may be something they would want to discuss.
Yeah, I think that'd be easy to do. There's one spot there. On Roth East, on the disadvantages, that Buba appeal could be one. That could, you know, it's farm use and there's an alternative. And the other one that's not listed on there, could be a fatal flaw, is the only reason sage grouse is not listed is because of Republican Congress, you know, from Western states not wanting it listed, but the dynamics in Congress have changed with, you know, 2 Democratic controlled houses, the Senate and Democratic president, which could happen over 100 years. That could be an ESA listing could create a major problem for us. Let's see if I had anything else in here, but Milliken Grade in the winter, maybe it's not mentioned, but I don't drive that road a lot in the winter, but I don't think that just that section going up could be a little bit of an issue that we've talked about. That's.
But was that brought up in the technical review? It wasn't mentioned today, but I'm not sure if it was in the
Transportation report?
Yeah, transportation report, I recall.
We can check. We can check all that.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of public comment on hang gliders. I didn't see you mention here the impact on that use. And I think, you know, long term, there's a real potential in Milliken Valley to develop as a major recreational resource for hang gliding, if you look at other places in the world. And that would somewhat be foreclosed on with the landfill sitting there. Same with the access road to Pine Mountain, there was some mention of that, but it kind of reduces the recreation experience in Milliken Valley. With wind, do we need to mention dust devils as it's separate from strong winds, given their potential to, include mini tornadoes?
Yeah, I think it's been noted in public comment several times, so yeah, I do think it needs to be important. Yes.
And there hasn't been any discussion of fire. Range fires do happen, the largest fire in Oregon. About 150 years was a range fire to Orange County, but I'm not Orange County, Maricopa County to the east, and the Roth east side would be more, I would think, more susceptible to fire than all the rocks and Jupiter is about. The Badlands hasn't burned, to my knowledge, in a long time, if ever. The population estimates, I don't know, they seem like a stretch that will have there will be limiting factors controlling us getting to 1 million people by, in 100 years, and whatever that was. I just can't see how Deschutes County, whether water or something else is going to at some point limit the population growth rather than just always going up like that. Just a thought, there's a lot based on the economic analysis on the population figures. And I just wonder how realistic they are, but I'm not an expert on that.
You're wondering about the impacts of the whole thing if you change consumption at some point?
Yeah, if your limiting factor is available water, so you don't have so many people in Deschutes County, you can't just keep doing that. At some point, it has to level off. And there might be some other limiting factors, just public land, the Oregon land use laws, zoning, farm use, forest use. I guess you could build a lot of 50-story skyscrapers in Bend or something.
We're working on
it. Yeah. But just a thought that shows those kind of assumptions may not be realistic, and if there's a lot based on those assumptions, if that's, but I can't read my own chicken scratch. I think I got most of it. Yeah, so the Roth, for what I could tell from what you said, the Roth site, basic advantages were better layout, easier digging and soil, lower cost of electricity, lower initial acquisition and development costs. The Moon Pit had the advantages on most other things, from water rights to no Uber appeal to existing mining. A lot of wildlife, the wildlife impacts are less wind impact, lower fire risk, less greenhouse gas emissions, lower mitigation costs. It does have to be located next to a somewhat artificial line from 15 years ago when I lived with the Badlands Wilderness. Okay. More time I could organize that. Just some quick thoughts.
That's great. Yeah. Might be.
You'll have more time.
So it might be interesting to look at what if there was I don't know how you would construct a scenario that had a different population forecast and just what that does to the cost factor.
Yeah.
If you're generating less tonnage and you've got the one facility that costs a lot more front and another one lower, but just what does that do to operational costs or cost per ton? Just to know.
Yeah, well, I made a note of that, so I think we may want to do a little bit of modeling so we can look at different population caps here over the next few years. What's that do to generation and cost? And bring that.
Oh, no. What were we gonna buy though? I was a little confused when you mentioned buying on what we would buy the existing farmhouse where he lives and the whole thing.
Yeah, that's the whole Roth East site. That would include the farmhouse and then the west side.
That's a function.
Which would be vacational.
That wouldn't be landfill.
Yeah, the county want to own, that's a functional house. Well, all that stuff is not related to a landfill.
Well, we haven't looked at, the only partition we looked at is potential dividing the Rock West. We haven't looked at partition Rock East. I don't know if we want somebody living on.
It's a vacation rental, maybe you could. What's the ownership pattern in terms of public versus private around Rockies? I don't remember off the top of my head. Like how much of it, I know a fair bit, obviously the western stuff is private. But, and we have Pine Mountain to the south, on the BLM, and our Forest Service, Forest Service that works with it. But what about, to the east and the north?
Yeah, so directly to the north is, I might have a big slide for this. There's BLM. To the north of part of it, and then I think there's some ranch land. Trying to remember.
There are a few farms off to the east.
Yeah.
With houses on them, they're like 2 or 3 to the east. And then I think after that it becomes largely range.
Those access routes wouldn't go by people's houses.
And most of the privately owned land is on rock, this is from the other side of what I'm not ready, correct?
Yeah, this is where the smaller lots are.
What is not for sale with the Roth site, which we were wondering about, was the with Roth West, they'd like to keep a portion of it so that they can actually bring cattle to, he has grazing rights in the Forest Service land on Pine Mountain Baylor. Yeah. So it actually does not want to sell those grazing rights. Right. We were interested in potentially getting that as part of mitigation as well.
The well would also be on that portion.
Yeah.
The Brandich.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to keep base property.
Yeah,
recite more map.
Yeah, I have a number of questions I'll just forward to the project team, but I did have one on the cost estimates. Are those just today's costs or were annual increases added in and, for projections like an operation?
Those are $23.
Yeah, those are in current context, not future escalated costs. What else you got?
I got a bunch, but
All right.
Just out of curiosity, the future operational costs, like 7.7 million, 8.4 million annually for those sites. How does that compare? It's completely different operation. How does that compare with the current company?
I think it's a little bit higher, not a whole lot higher than the current operating costs.
Yeah, so I think what you're seeing with what's gone up is obviously the transport, and that's sure, that we showed. But also like the water cost, and some of those types of related costs, also went up just because of the, obviously the hauling water or the cost of water for the site.
Any other question?
Clarification, in the zoning, you state that the Roth site is within a surface mining impact area. And I'm curious as to what surface mine it's associated with, where it's located and what's its status.
I believe it's related to a surface mine zone up along Highway 20. He's nodding his head. Is there a pit up there up north? I think it's do a lot of like OHV on there now, right?
Yeah, and then the Singles family owns a pit to the east. In fact, they were on the list for a while of a preferred site, and then they pulled that out, but they're just north of the highway, a few miles east. And that was Bob Coates developed that years ago. And that's a surface mining site with really high quality highway aggregate in it.
Were there any other questions from SWAC members online? All right, hearing none, Craig, you had a question or comment?
I just had a question whether the team looked at the priority wildlife conservation area that came, ODFW that came out in December. Because that should add to the risks at the Broad East site.
Yeah, we can ask our natural resource leads about that specifically. They've been working in close conservation coordination with ODFW, so I would be surprised if they didn't bring that up to their attention, but we'll be sure that they've looked at that.
And then I also agree with Robin that it's quite likely that the sage grouse will become an endangered species because the population in Oregon and West White has been decreasing to the point that they could become extinct by 2040. So it's a significant risk that could happen before the site's established. That's it.
Quick question, it's probably been discussed in the past. What happens to the recycling and the yard?
That's currently going on?
Yes.
Those will continue to occur either at not landfill or other sites.
That's
So
right.
not landfill will stay open. The site, we just won't be landfilling there, but all other activities will be going on there or in other facilities.
That's what I thought, yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I think we're just at our time, so I want to thank everybody for your attendance and comments, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
We'll highlight what's coming up next. So the next meeting on the 19th, so you get a bonus hour.
I've got a week to read 1,000 pages. So.
Yeah, we're gonna try and get it out before that if we can.
Yeah.
We can get it out by March 5th. We'll get it out by
Yeah.
March 5th.
And then, getting your feedback back on the report, and then final site recommendation from SWAC at the April 16th meeting.
Will that full report have an executive summary for the public and for us that can't use 1,000 pages?
This executive summary that was provided will be there up front, and perhaps one way to look at it is you can, if there's certain areas you want to dive into more from the executive summary or from the report body, you can dive into those reports. As you are
Yeah,
interested.
we're trying to put it so that there's the executive summary, brief executive summary, the general report of 60 pages thereabouts, and then all the detail.
You got layers of it.
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lot, yeah.
Yes. It's going to be on the sidelines, so.
Next time.
Advantages.
Right.